Hello, dog fans. Welcome to DawgDial. I'm your host, Josh Mendlinger, with my partner, Joel Taco Thompson. Taco, how you doing?
Good.
Excellent. Welcome to this edition of postseason football DawgDial style.
SEC Championship
show. SEC champions, your Georgia Bulldogs, putting a beat down on the Auburn Tigers, getting their revenge, exacting their revenge, and showing them exactly what they should be doing on the field compared to that last outing.
We beat the crap out of them War Eagles.
Splatted the War Eagles, swatted them, whatever you want to say, folks. The Bulldogs show up. The Bulldogs prevail 28-7 in an outstanding showing by by all three, the offense, defense, and special teams. It was a little bit of laundry on the field early on, a couple of plays that could have gone either way, kind of questionable laundry calls. But all in all, the Georgia Bulldogs look strong going into the end of the first half and at the end of the second half. They certainly look good at the end of the game, and it looked great seeing all that black and red confetti coming down from the sky in the Benz Stadium. And you know what, Taco? I think we're moving on to the playoffs. What do you think?
Playoffs, we are. We'll get into that a little bit more, but it was a great win. The last SEC championship for the Dogs was in 2005, so it's been a drought for a while.
It has been.
The last trip was 2012,
with
so
DJ Shockley at the helm there. So
I do recall that.
Yes, so it was certainly a great win and a great comeback and a great way to end the SEC season. We will get into that and all of the game in a little bit when we come back from the short break on DawgDial. Thanks for joining us. We are live from Buffalo's Cafe in Woodstock, Georgia. We'll be right back on DawgDial. Stick with us. All right, welcome back to DawgDial. I'm your host again, Josh Mendlinger with Taco Thompson, and we are the weekly show all about Georgia Bulldog sports, especially Georgia Bulldog football at this time of year. And we are broadcasting on a network of radio stations and on Facebook Live from Buffalo's Cafe in Woodstock, Georgia. Thank you to the folks here at Buffalo's Cafe. Come on and join us for our broadcast if you'd like. Get your details at the Buffalo's Cafe in Woodstock, Georgia. Come on down. Taco, let's get into the game. Let's start talking about what a great performance it was. Great thing to watch, a thing of beauty, whatever you want to call it, folks. Dog Nation is happy, and Dog Nation is psyched that in his second season, Kirby Smart takes him to a championship.
Kirby does. Congratulations to the Bulldogs and the seniors. The seniors came back, and he mentioned it in his press conference that the seniors is what it's all about, and I think the senior leadership brought them back. And we'll go through the flow of the game here a little bit. Early on, it didn't look great for the Bulldogs. Auburn took the opening kickoff and drove it right down the field, and actually put the first few points on the board. Stidham was in there, and Kerryon Johnson was in there, and that was one of the factors that we talked about in the game. But and Auburn actually was on their second drive, and we had a great play where Bellamy stripped and fumbled, and that first turnover, and I think that was a big turning point in the game.
Sure thing.
And then from about middle of the second quarter, you noticed Kerryon Johnson wasn't the Kerryon Johnson of old. That was one of the factors going into the game. I had a checklist. Here's the Dogs coming into the game. Is Kerryon John going to be healthy?
Right.
Check. No.
Check. No, definitely not.
Can Georgia's offensive line man up versus Auburn's defense? Check. Yeah.
Yes, they did.
Can Georgia establish its run? Check. Yes. And Georgia make adjustments to open up the running game? Absolutely. I'll talk about that a little bit more.
We'll get into
Can Jake Fromm make the plays in critical situations? I think he got sacked a couple of times early. Could have been ruffled.
Yeah, didn't turn the ball over.
Did not turn it over. In fact, we only had, I think, one fumble, which we didn't lose. And turnovers, we'll get into that too, because turnovers were a part of this game that were not part of the original game. Can Georgia play mistake-free football? Is that a check on your checklist?
It's about a halfway check.
I would say a halfway check.
Yeah.
1 out of half. 1 out of full. Check.
Well, there were a few penalties here and there.
Penalties.
And, if you want to call them, it depends if you call that, unless you have a different checkbox for penalties on your list there.
Some of those yellow flags were a little
questionable.
Yeah. Especially the one on. We were going down the score and the pick play.
Right.
So that is a very, very subjective call. So that cost Georgia four points at a critical juncture in the game.
Sure was.
So, but at least we got 3 out of that Blankenship, hit that field goal, 27 yards. So there you go. At halftime, Auburn took the lead at 7.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia came back and took the lead 10-7 at half. But it was a nail biter there. Come near halftime, so
I'd have to say that it was a nail biter. It almost looked like Georgia was, and the coaches were purposeful in their play design and choices. It looked like they were not going for necessarily the big play all at once, not wanting to risk that confidence factor for the Bulldogs and risk getting down early to the Auburn team.
Yeah, I think Auburn early on, Auburn plays up-tempo. You saw Georgia, and here's an adjustment that Chaney put in, is Georgia went up-tempo some. So early in that first quarter, what you saw was, trading off some of those substitutions.
Sure.
And so trying to slow that game down a little bit.
Yeah, there were some early timeouts called in the first half, and unexpected, which you typically don't see from these two teams.
No.
Not being, and I don't know if it was they weren't prepared, or what do you think? Was it because they weren't prepared, or was it because it was a different look, or just timing? Everyone was trying to do things quickly.
I think there was a lot of hype. Auburn does have a phenomenal game plan scheme. You see how they shift formations. You see how much the motion they put. You see how wide they spread it out.
Yes.
And they had without in the first half, they had Kerryon Johnson, but in the second half they didn't. So one of the big points of the game probably, and one of the things on the checklist was, can you put a stop to Kerryon Johnson? Because in the previous game, and in the next segment we'll compare notes from game 1 to game 2, but it was almost an exact reversal statistically from game 1 to game 2. So Georgia controlled Auburn's rushing game, and a lot of that notably to Kerryon Johnson, who, as we mentioned in our last show, that shoulder injury didn't look like it was going to be
ready,
easy to go 100% with, especially how he plays. He's a great back, and so
their next guy up, Stove, was not too shabby though.
Not bad.
They were dependent on him in the first game. He definitely was the guy who had to spell him in the first game, but in the second game, Stove they were dependent on him a lot, and he played pretty well, both blocking for the quarterback, but also on his run plays and his catches out of the backfield. So,
well, Auburn came out, they're going to have a fired-up game plan, but, I think you saw Georgia open it up, their offense, and we can talk about how Georgia got to the edges in this game. Mm-hmm. And the running game opened up because I think we were getting to the edges, and I'll tell you, I couldn't say enough about Jake Fromm's performance. As I mentioned, he could have got rattled early. He did not. He kept his head in the game, managed the game well, and threw some of those quick outs and the sweeps instead of running just inside the tackle with Chubb and Michelle. And you saw the latter one with Swift, and you saw how swift he was there. I think it was the fourth quarter on that run. But
he did well.
So Georgia's was up-tempo. So, I liked the up-tempo. I liked some of the formations even. I know it's close and near to your heart, but that that tight end finally got in the game for the second touchdown.
Well, the tight ends actually, he did. Well, actually, yeah, Nauta, number 18, Nauta, who I've been talking about since week one, and even preseason, that they were going to focus on them. Of course, things changed when Fromm came in, and it wasn't Eason, who, being that they were roommates and buddies. But the bottom line is, I think the tight ends had an impact in this game, significant impact, blocking and on the receiving end, obviously, with the quarterback hitting it, Nauta in the end zone. But if you check it out on the play and pause it, folks, you see both tight ends were wide open on that play, and Jake Fromm had a choice of which one to go to, and it was a great play call. It was great play design, and if you freeze frame it, you see they're both open in the end zone, and they were not going to be stopped either way.
Yep. So, I mean, good play calling, I would say. It's the best play calling game, and that was one of the things that I was concerned about coming in. Are we going to do vanilla, try to establish the run inside? And if that doesn't happen, because this is what happened in the first game against Auburn. So had to come out with a different game plan. Everything was clicking for the Dogs. Once you got into that second quarter, especially the third quarter, we'll get into how dominating the time of possession and how Georgia was just really able to man up in the third and fourth quarters to put the game out of the way.
Most definitely. And we're definitely going to have to talk about that defense, that stout defense, and led by your SEC championship MVP of Roquan Smith.
Roquan was all over the place.
He was the defensive player of the game, absolutely, and he was hitting hard. He was taking no prisoners, and we'll get into that in our next segment, and we'll start talking about and highlighting the individuals that stood out in this SEC championship game for your champion, Georgia Bulldogs. We'll be right back, folks. Stick with us on DawgDial. Be right back. Go Dogs. All right, folks, welcome back to DawgDial. I'm your host, Josh Mendlinger, with Taco Thompson here on Facebook Live, as well as on our flagship radio station, which is Real Country Q 92.3 WMOQ FM in Athens, Monroe, right up there next to the House of the Dogs, right near Uga, right near Harry, and right near Kirby Smart. I'm sure they are paying attention to all the media this week because it's all positive for the Georgia Bulldogs.
All good stuff. An SEC championship, and like we just said, the revenge game, and I thought it was Georgia's best game of the year, honestly. I mean, they've had, the early on when Eason went out and Fromm came in, obviously you started early in the season with some conservative play calling, but that has been consistent throughout the year. But I really did think Fromm was extremely accurate. Let me get his stats on the game. He was 16.
Sure.
He was 16 of 22 for 183, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when he was pressured, he was sacked twice. So in the previous game against Auburn, and this is where we want to draw some comparisons, Auburn sacked Fromm 4 times in the previous game, so a little bit more pressure on him. They did have some pressure, but I think the Bulldogs' offensive line did a much better job on production. The other thing that I noticed was Fromm throwing quicker passes. So there's quick out passes, and then he also rolled. So rather than just being a drop back and being a target, with a 5-step or 7-step drop, he was rolling and hitting targets on the roll. And just throwing a football on the roll is a tough assignment. So very impressed.
Yeah, as were the national commentators. If you paid attention to them, they did pull off a good quote or pointed out that the out passes, I have to give credit to what I was listening to with Gary Danielson and
he
company.
can throw it. He can throw it to the sidelines.
And that is impressive. And he's throwing it to the right spots. And obviously that's important. Is that you need to get it to the spots where only your guy's going to get it, or it's going out of bounds. And that he seems to have proven that he can handle as a true freshman.
Interesting, too, was the mix of targets. Godwin was the heavy target for the night. Wims has normally been the go-to.
Man,
Wims,
yes.
Godwin. Well, also you saw McCole Hardman. He had 4 catches on the night, especially that quick slant, which I thought was an excellent call that went for many, many yards. And out of the backfield, Swift caught 3.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle caught 2, and Chubb caught 1. As you mentioned, we got 1 to the tight end. So, again, that goes to the play calling, the game design, and again, no interceptions. And so, 2 great quarterbacks coming in here, and Stidham was the other. Once you accomplish stopping Kerryon Johnson, then the next thing you've got to do is you've got to stop Jarrett Stidham on the other side of the ball.
He was number 1 quarterback completion rating in the SEC, number 4 in the nation as far as quarterback completion percentage. Over 2,600 yards passing and 32 touchdowns on the year, and he doesn't throw interceptions all that often. So you're talking about one of the top quarterbacks in the nation that, thankfully, we've had. This was the second look for Adam, and this was well planned defensively.
You got to see 2 great quarterbacks in action there too. And again, Georgia. Let's go. Here what I wanted to share is the comparison between game 1 and game 2.
All right. Well,
the passing yardage was fairly similar. Auburn in game 1, 17 of 25. Georgia was 13 of 29. Fromm was in the second game. Stidham was 16 of 32. Fromm was 16 for 22. Passing yards in the first game, Auburn had 251 against 145 in the second game, so fairly significant difference there. The main issue was, though, in the first game, Auburn rushed for 237 yards. In the SEC championship game, rushed for 114, and here you go for the most glaring is Georgia's rushing yards were at 238 and Auburn's rushing yards were at 114. So it's almost a flip-flop of the game. Total yards, Auburn had 488 total yards in the first game. Georgia had 421 in the second. Auburn had 259, so there you go.
Okay, well, tell me, I'll ask this question to you. Obviously there are many factors, variables involved with that. Game planning, having seen them before, game tape, where it wasn't just another team, it was actual Bulldog videotape versus the Eagles, versus the Tigers, War Eagles, whichever you want to call yourselves there, Auburn.
We still like the eagle.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, it's an American symbol.
There you
go.
So we'll call them the Tigers then, because we don't want to put a beat down on the American eagle, right?
We don't
put a beat down on the Tigers out of Alabama there. But the question from me to you is this: Auburn put up big numbers against Georgia, then put up big numbers against Alabama. Both of them were home games for Auburn. You pulled them out of their comfort zone, pulled them out of that, in the plains there, and showed a weakness? Is that basically what we could call it? Or it's just the fact that, we finally got the better of them?
Well, obviously there's a factor there. So the Jordan Hare and all the coaches talk about, boy, it's a tough place to play, and any home field advantage is a tough place to play. I think maybe those Auburn Tigers were feeling it better at Jordan-Hare than they were at the Mercedes-Benz.
There was a lot
Dome.
of red there.
So
a lot more red at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. That's for certain.
Well, they played the train whistle for touchdowns for both teams. I did notice that.
You did find that, okay.
But no, I think maybe a road trip, a different environment for Auburn. But again, back to the basics of Georgia played a near flawless game. There were some penalties, but no turnovers. One of the things that I thought turned out advantageous for Georgia in this game was turnovers. We had 2, and we also had a blocked field goal.
You're right.
So 2 fumbles and a blocked field goal. That stopped Auburn's momentum. So Georgia ended up with 15 points off turnovers.
And momentum.
And that really, really made a big difference in this game. But, credit, as we talked about, to the defense. Roquan Smith was absolutely all over the field. Lorenzo Carter was everywhere.
Certainly.
And I think he had a cause fumble. And Daquan Hawkins-Muckle was the one who got his hand on the block kick. Yes. So I thought that was pretty significant right there when you put a stop to Auburn and you get it turned over on downs. And so you say Auburn is an away game at the Mercedes-Benz Dome. I think some of those things in a momentum can affect the emotion of the players on the field. So, yes, I would have to agree that will affect the mode that you're in on the field. So playing it, and it wasn't a home game for the Dogs. I think this was, the second time the Dogs have played in the Mercedes.
Second time.
Second time.
No, wait. No, that's a good question.
Maybe the first time.
I think it's the first time for them this season. You're right. However, the fact is, the defense reset itself and came out and just stopped Auburn in there. In the Benz Stadium, in the SEC championship game. Roquan Smith's hit in the first series against Slayton on the sideline there, where he just established that he was not going to let anybody past him, and that anybody that comes near the secondary, the linebacker area is going to get hit. And I think not only do the turnovers set momentum, not only does a blocked field goal help the momentum, but that defense just –
and more pressure on Stidham, especially in the second half when Auburn figured it wasn't going to have the opportunity to run the ball for 250 yards. Then you noticed a shift to pressuring the quarterback. So Georgia, what I saw in the previous game against Auburn, maybe rushing 4. This time I saw them rushing 5.
They did. And they certainly changed it up. They went to that. Certainly put more in the box right up front. They realize they need to make a change.
So more adjustments, and then, obviously at halftime adjustments, and so I thought that was another good thing. We talk about, things that make a good football team, and halftime adjustments against Auburn, I think they were well done and played out extremely well. If you look at time of possession in the third and fourth quarter, I think Georgia had double the time of possession and really kept onto the ball. And the best defense is to have your offense out on the field.
Yes.
And scoring points. So Georgia took it away.
They did. They started, the first series was a little scary. And I mean, not to backtrack in the game, but the first series was a little scary. They looked a little shaky, but they definitely settled down and took it in the third and fourth quarters and started to run, I won't say run away with it, but basically did.
Absolutely. I think in all facets, the defense played and did what it had to do to shut down the run, and the offense, conversely, turned it on and showed its ability to run against a very strong Auburn defensive front. There's no differences. There were no injuries, but I think the Georgia offensive line stepped up again. Got more to the outside with the backs. I think that was a smart idea. Mixed in some pass plays on first down. Georgia wasn't that great on their third down conversions in the game, but overall, mixing it up, not being predictable, I thought it was a good game plan for Georgia.
Yeah, even on special teams, mixing it up a little bit when they went to Bryce Ramsey coming in. They threw the punter out in the to the Z position out there, and then brought Ramsey, and that forced a timeout by Auburn to figure out what was going on, because that was they identified that if they could even shake it up in the special teams department, that's going to keep Auburn on their toes and thinking and worrying about what's going on.
And I think that's exactly the point. I think Georgia had Auburn on their heels, and a lot of that in the second half, and that's where Georgia was able to take that momentum and just run away with it.
All right, well, let's take a quick break here at Buffalo's Cafe on DawgDial, and we will come right back and get into a few more player stats and highlights and start to look towards, we'll talk about what else is going on around the SEC, and then, of course, we got to start planning on what's next for the Georgia Bulldogs on New Year's Day. So stick with us, folks, on DawgDial. Go Dogs. All right, welcome back to DawgDial. I'm your host again, Josh Mendlinger with Taco Thompson. We are covering the Georgia Bulldogs championship game, the win against Auburn 28-7. And what an exciting end to that game, especially when all of our the running backs for Georgia were starting to get into the share some of the handoffs, some of the ball, spreading it around. I think Jake Fromm did that very well with his I don't say his play calling, but decision-making out on the field.
Well, Swift, in that fourth quarter had the 164-yard run. That was a thing of beauty. He had 7 carries for 88 yards. Chubb had 13 carries for 78 yards. Sony Michel, 7 carries, 45 yards. Harrion got in there on a couple of carries. Holyfield and Hardman got in there. So overall, the total 41 rushes, 259-yard gains. That gets Georgia, it gets back to where a 5.8 yards per rush against Auburn. I think in the previous game against Auburn, it was like a 1.8. So yes. It was miserable and dismal. And again, going back to our defense, the defense led Roquan Smith. You were talking about him earlier. He had a total of 13 tackles. I mean, that is just all over the field. 2 of those were tackles for loss. He had 1 sack. Yes. DeAndre Walker had a sack as well. Bellamy had that sack where it stripped the ball and got the turnover. But everywhere, DeAndre Baker had a great game. J.R. Reed, DeAndre Walker. And one thing I will say is Stidham, who's known for his long ball,
right,
can throw the ball, and Georgia did not let anything behind them. There were no beat deeps, no big plays.
Well, how about the defense on that flea flicker? Double exchange and a flea flicker. Georgia just shut it
covered.
Down.
Yeah, they had it covered. So, the discipline on defense, boy, I mean, on plays like that, absolutely fantastic execution. And Georgia, just on special teams, let's talk about offense, defense, special teams. Blankenship was 2 for 2. And, special teams, I've been predicting and I was thinking and hoping for Hardman to break one on kick returns. Didn't.
Well, he's got another game or
Yeah,
two, hopefully.
At least two.
Two more games.
How about we've got two more games?
Yeah,
two more games.
He's got two more to break one for you.
So, but punting.
We'll put the special request in. Okay?
Niziolek punted for a 44-yard average, so we needed to get it out. Then and Rodrigo put, I think, 5 out of the 6 out of the end zone. I think one of those maybe was not intentional, so he's still setting the records and adding to his record book there. So,
well, in the UGA red zone defense is the best in the SEC, and they certainly shut it down.
And continued, I think, their streak in this game.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's Georgia football. So, Georgia in this game, it was and I don't think, the odds makers had Auburn ahead, I think, a slight favorite.
Last couple days. Something changed.
Well, the betting lines changed. They want that cha-ching coming in there.
Well, they must have had some information passed their way, or they just forced it so that people would get back into their pockets and start laying a little more out.
Digging it out. Yeah. Well, yeah. But Georgia, and this being a big game, so the other thing is you want your players, and I heard talk about, hey, do you play loose? Do you play tight in a big game? It looked like Georgia was comfortable. It looks like they were ready. They were well coached. They were prepared. And, assignment football, and there was a lot going on. Early in the game, it looked like the Georgia defense was looking over at the sidelines when those substitutions were coming in. They settled that down, and as soon as they got in the groove, and again, going back to Fromm and his execution, when he needed to make some connections and make some throws, I thought he did a fantastic job. He's a super accurate quarterback, and he's got a good head on his shoulders, and I think Georgia fans will. I mean, they don't look at him as a freshman anymore. I mean,
He's not. In the SEC, you have to grow up real quick or get out. It's basically the way it works. So you can't call him a freshman anymore, even though he is a true freshman. He's not playing like one, and he's stepping up, much like we've seen in several other national championships games and championship winners over the last bunch of years, I should say, where some freshmen have stepped up for other teams. It's nice to see that it's actually coming to fruition for Georgia.
And he will be the only freshman true freshman quarterback in the college football playoff, too. Yeah. So,
that's true.
Kudos to him. And, again, go back to kudos to the defense. The defense just played outstanding all night long. Mm-hmm. And
Roquan Smith it's like he knew what was going on. He was everywhere, as he's been all season. He has been everywhere. He's missed again. I think he's, to his own self-evaluation, I think he's missed one open field tackle all year long. He's been in on everything. He even had that the third down sack on that blitz that he came up the middle, and that forced.
I'd hate to see him coming in on me.
Could you imagine? And it led to the punting, of which then led to the illegal punt formation, which pushed Auburn back a little bit more. So Georgia ended up with some better field position after a few extra yards that pushed them back. So he made his presence felt, and he's going to make his presence felt on this Thursday at the ESPN Awards that are coming up at the Hall of Fame in downtown Atlanta. I think he and there's a chance for Kirby Smart to be win something too. So we'll see what comes up this Thursday.
Get some more hardware on top of the Kirby bonuses.
Well, that'll come in the next section. That's if we mention, does that mean he has to share some with us?
I think he does. I think he does. I think he should for all the dog fans out here. But
yes.
No, the defense, and one of the things that the opponent, and we'll talk about this, Oklahoma and anybody who plays Georgia is going to have to scheme against a fast Georgia defense. Yes. So Coach Smart mentioned in his press conference preached two things this week, was composure and physicality. And I think the Georgia defense took that to heart, as they were physical. But the main thing about Georgia is if you want to try to get it outside, there are some fast front seven. That is a dangerous front seven. And the defensive backs, again, have been playing adequate coverage, have not let anything get behind them as much as I've seen in previous years of a Georgia defense. There's not any blown assignments there. So overall, the Georgia defense, the top 5, what do we say, 5, 6 in the nation. I don't know what it is after this game, but that is a top-tier defense.
And Auburn tried to stifle them or to trick them up by going to that hurry-up offense. Mm-hmm. And if you notice, we must give some kudos to the black and white stripes on the field as they though we got a penalty, but they did control Auburn and have to hold them up even when they tried to go in the up tempo.
You have to allow substitutions. Absolutely.
And the stripes on the field certainly allowed that to. The substitutions to happen properly. Of course, there was that one play where it ended up being
it cost
us a little bit on one flag, but
then they caught on to it, and then and then the game settled down. But I agree with you. I think they did a good job with that.
There were some other questionable calls by the Stripes.
Pick call.
The pick call.
Pick call.
Well, there was face mask involved with that on that long pickoff play. His hand did get in there, inadvertent as it was. His hand did get into the face mask, and you got to call that. It is a safety issue.
It didn't look like a pick, but it was a pick.
Oh, you mean the pick? I was talking the pick off. I was
the pick
the
off.
Interception.
Yeah.
That's what I was getting to. But yes, the pick play was totally not a pick play.
Right.
I mean, it was supposed to be. But we can talk about that. But it looks like the Auburn defense got the best of the receiver, but knocked him into their own player and did the work for us. It should not have been a penalty called, but it certainly.
That's one they'll probably take back and study that one
at
the SEC ref conference. As I would think they would take that one back and study.
And especially because it was a and I'm not exactly sure why it didn't get reviewed because it was a touchdown. Why it didn't get reviewed and set up and negated. But I guess if the penalty's called, it must be one of those penalties.
Especially on a scoring play, maybe. There's so many different rules coming in about what can be reviewed, what not these days.
That must have been one of those things. So
not reviewable.
What can you do?
Well, the other dominant thing, Georgia, mentioned points off turnovers in this game, and then also time of possession. The second half time of possession, and Georgia did get the ball to open the second half, and Georgia had it for 20 minutes in the second half. Auburn had it for 9.5 minutes. Mm-hmm. So, again, the great offense, the best defense is a great offense, so credit to the offense for maintaining possession of the football and allowing Georgia to pull away with a couple of great big plays there too, exciting, and that's when the Bulldog fan faithful got hyped.
You betcha, and hopefully they'll carry on that hype, and I'm sure they will going into the New Year's Day championship
in
playoff.
Pasadena.
And we'll get into that in a few moments. We're going to take a quick break here on DawgDial from Buffalo's Cafe in Woodstock, Georgia. Stick with us, folks, on DawgDial. Go Dogs. Welcome back to DawgDial. I'm your host, Josh Mendlinger, with Taco Thompson, my partner in football crime here. Taco, let's quickly run down the rest of the season and the championship and the statistics and the stats and who was where for the SEC, because obviously that's going to where people end up. It will probably be where the prognosticators start off next year in the rankings and all that for SEC. And then once we get through the SEC, let's talk about the Final Four that were chosen and how the committee
College
did.
Football Committee. Yeah, for Dog fans, this is significant here. The SEC Championship game was formed in 1992. Florida leads the number of appearances and is tied with Alabama in terms of wins for the SEC Championship. Florida has 7 wins. Alabama has 7. Auburn has 7 appearances and 3 wins, and their 4th loss was delivered Saturday.
There you go.
Georgia has 6 appearances and 3 wins. LSU 4 wins. Tennessee 2 wins. Arkansas, Mississippi State, South Carolina, I hate to say, have 0 wins, but they do have some appearances. I know those folks in those lands are striving to get back there, and yet to be in the show is Kentucky, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. They joined later, of course, in 2012. And Vanderbilt, they've yet to make an appearance in the SEC Championship. So this was a big game. This was Kirby Smart year 2, rebound from an 8-5 year, and come back and go 12-1 and beat a team that had beat you soundly a few weeks ago, and who had beaten Alabama, a great team. I got nothing but good things to say about that Auburn team. That was a solid team, and this was playing for all the marbles. So what this is your play-in game, Georgia. You have the opportunity to rise up, play in the game, win the SEC championship, and you're in the college football playoff, which leads us to the selection show for the college football playoff.
And
So,
there was a lot of pressure on that committee. They were up from what we all hear till the wee hours of the night after Saturday night.
2:30, I think. 2:30.
And then made that announcement at noon on Sunday.
Any surprises?
I don't know if you can call them surprises at this point, as many of the coverages were giving. A lot of the media were covering it. We're talking about it's not so much a surprise as it is it could have gone either way, and you could justify how things went. Because the bottom line, it was going to be that 4th spot that was the open spot.
Assuming TCU didn't beat Oklahoma, which that wasn't even close, and of course, Clemson manhandling Miami. So the 2 SEC spots and the Big 12 spot were clinched. If Oklahoma had lost, that would have left the Big 12 probably out, and you would have probably had Ohio State and Alabama
in there.
creep in there.
Yes.
So, but that didn't happen. Oklahoma took care of business, leaving 1 spot and excluding.
Someone had to be left off.
Somebody, the Pac-12. Even I heard USC got some love there because they won Friday night the Pac-12 championship. That was a great game down to the wire.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and USC really did come back towards the end of the season. So they, you get stronger towards the end of the season. They played well and beat some really solid teams. But I think what happened with the selection committee is they, could be considered somewhat controversial for them to pick Alabama in the top 4.
Yes. Either way, there was going to be controversy, as I mentioned, and there's going to be some haters either way, and people upset. But you can't keep everybody happy. That goes back, and that would happen no matter how many people or how many teams were accepted to the playoffs. There's always going to be that outlier. There's always going to be that next team that could have, should have, would have made it. But that's why you got to win all your games and show up. In a relatively short season, you got to
don't lose to Iowa by 31.
Right.
That's not a good idea if you want to play for the.
That's true.
That's kind of one of the things there. And strength of schedule, you look at all the elements, conference championships, didn't really play into it this year
No.
with leaving the Big Ten out, and obviously the Pac-12. There's only 4 spots for 5. Some people talk about going to 8. I don't think it's really that necessary. There's always going to be somebody on the bubble.
Yeah, the 9th team would be upset, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
The
that's
9th,
same
10th.
thing happens in March with March Madness. There's always that 65th, 66th team that's upset.
But no undefeated team is here. So, college football competition is stiff. So not a single team in the Final Four is left unscathed. And Auburn would have been had they beat Georgia, Auburn would have been a 2-loss team in the top 4. They would have punched their ticket. But as it stands,
and the question is whether or not Alabama would have shown up if Auburn won.
Yeah.
They probably still would have been in.
That would have been a borderline call too. So it's conversation,
right.
And it's part of the show. The college football playoff show I thought was going to be an hour. I mean, it went on for several hours, and so there's a lot of interest in college football. And if you remember last year, Ohio State did not win their conference championship, but they were in.
Right.
So it's kind of go back and forth. But the new precedent set this year is that there are 2 SEC teams in, no Big Ten, no Pac-12, just the Big 12, ACC, and SEC.
And
so that ruffles some feathers.
Well, and that's why the human element was brought back into this with the committee. It's not just the statistical analysis. It's not just the computer-generated teams with that are out there. There is the eye test. There is the interest, and I think the committee, as you watched it, if you listened to how they ran the committee and listened to the chairman during that show today. That the people who were observing it and people who were
smart people
right that are involved with it, they are actually, and the fact that they actually controlled who was voting on it by having those who might have a connection to a team and might be voting
recused themselves.
They were excused and had to step out and didn't get the vote, and I think that helped control it. Now, question is, should they have some total third party that nobody has a connection to anything, but I don't know if you can actually get away with that and still have quality decision-making if you go total third-party outsiders that have nothing to do with football.
Well, I know the talking guys on ESPN and the other networks today were having a tough time trying to fill up an hour conversation about who's in Ohio State or Georgia. I even saw some predictions, some statistical analysis tools that had a more weighted percentage for Ohio State. But as you mentioned, that the chairman of the College Football Playoff Committee was extremely matter-of-fact about the fact that the committee voted the best team, and they compared Alabama versus Ohio State, and they said unequivocally that Alabama was the better team. Thus, Alabama got the spot, knowing that they would get some of this criticism.
Sure.
And, of course, you've got is the roundabout with all the coaches lobbying. You saw Saban lobbying. You saw
sure thing.
You saw the Ohio State Coach Meyer talk about it. You even saw the USC coach lobby for his team. So, but I think the committee played the hard line, and they made the right decision. They made the right decision based on body of work, was what I was told, and looking at all of the factors that go in. And so and I guarantee you they watched a lot more tape of a lot more teams than you and I and the average fan has. So
that's true. Now, as far as their decision making, it's going from here on out, in the future, in the decision making process. I think they had to. They went with that, set the precedent of bringing Alabama into this because of the eye test and because of that human factor and what they think that Alabama brings more to the table for this Final Four in the playoffs. In the future, that's going to have to be coached in or brought into each team that, hey, you know what? You can't just play your cupcakes, and when you do have a game that's not a cupcake, you better show up every game, every Saturday.
Yeah, one of the criticisms was that Alabama had a cupcake on their schedule, but conversely, Ohio State had UNLV, which is not exactly a barn burner. So, really, now here's where we're set up. And we're set up for a duel between the rankings. Obviously, Clemson came out number 1, Oklahoma number 2, Georgia number 3, Alabama number 4. So those are the college football playoff teams. So Clemson
matchups
will face off against Alabama, which will be a clash of titans. We've seen that before recently.
Yes.
At the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans, and our beloved Bulldogs get to take a nice little trip out to the Rose Bowl to take on the Oklahoma Sooners.
Yeah, that's gonna put a lot more people watching that Rose Bowl parade. What do you think? Or I'm sorry, the Tournament of Roses parade. It's not the Rose Bowl parade. They can't call it that anymore because they're disassociated with one another. Of course, for sponsorship dollars and reasons.
No.
For that. But yeah, imagine that. Television dollars come into play in college football. But that's going to be a great trip. The question is, and it was brought up by all the media, will that trip out west cause them to be tired? Will there be jet lag? Will that affect their play? Well, Oklahoma have to travel as well. So it's not like they're coming from that much closer to California. So that should be basically a non-factor.
Yeah, and we'll get into talking about Oklahoma here in the next segment, but it sets up to be a good New Year's Day. And New Year's Day game, Georgia and Oklahoma will play at, I think, about the 5 o'clock time frame. Clemson, Alabama will play the evening game, and then we'll know what happens and who's going to be coming back to Atlanta for the Mercedes-Benz Super Bowl National Championship.
Let's talk about that, because that's going to be amazing. If the Georgia Bulldogs come almost to it's not quite a home game, but it would be very close to that as you can get. So we'll take a break here on DawgDial. Join us back here in a moment on Facebook Live, as well as on our flagship radio station and other stations around Georgia. Please stick with us. We'll be right back on DawgDial. All right, welcome back to DawgDial. I'm Josh Mendlinger, your host, with my partner Taco Thompson. And Joel, let's talk about Oklahoma. They're coming up New Year's Day, Pasadena, Rose Bowl. What do you think?
Boomer Sooners.
Yeah.
The Boomer were and I got a little nugget for you here.
There we go.
A little bit, but
lay it on us.
Boomers were the pioneers headed out west. The Sooners, you ready for the nugget?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Sooner, you know what a Sooner is?
Sooner or later, I will find out.
The Sooners were there's the land distribution, so there was a line to cross, and back in the day, I think it was late 1800s. Mm-hmm. Well, I know that for sure, but not just sure the exact year. But you were there with your wagon and your horses, and you got a chance to.
Yes.
Somebody was run out and establish a stake on land claims. So if you darted off before the shot of the gun.
Yes.
Then you were considered a Sooner.
You went too soon.
That's a Sooner.
Yeah.
So
and you got shot, and you were shot at.
You might have been.
There was military there, if I believe so, and you were. It was a crime, and they had the right to shoot at you, and if you went too soon.
So don't be a Sooner.
Don't be a Sooner. I'm not sure that's exactly what I would want to be known for, but it does happen.
Well, the Sooners are on a march, and Georgia has a formidable opponent. All four top teams are formidable, so
Yes.
Georgia knows the tests only get more difficult from here. And Oklahoma plays in the Big 12. Obviously, they have the Baker Mayfield Heisman Trophy very likely winner.
Likely winner, absolutely.
And
I was going to get to that. I mean, you're going up against a great player.
this is the most prolific offense in the nation going against one of the top defenses in the nation. So let me tell you, let me give you a stat on Baker Mayfield so far this year. 262 completions, or 369 attempts for 4,340 yards for a 71% completion rate.
That's a lot.
11.7 yards per connection, which is pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
41 touchdowns against 5 interceptions. His quarterback rating is 203. So, hey, if you're Georgia and you're Mel Tucker sitting there planning for it, well, you know what you've got to do against a team that puts up 583 yards a game.
Yes.
And points per game. You look at they put up the lights. I think the score with them in Oklahoma. The Big 12 is a shootout conference. I mean, they joke about not having any defense out there, but
it's like watching an NBA All-Star game.
It is crazy, crazy, crazy. So, let's talk about Oklahoma's defense. Not as stellar, since we're on that subject. They're 81st in the nation, and they give up 25 points a game. That's in the Big 12. So, Oklahoma is going to try to outscore you. So the talk is, I'm not sure what the over-under is in this game, but
I'm sure over the next 3.5 weeks it will change and vary.
So they're not bad runners either. So Oklahoma does have some balance. They've got a brigade of backs, much like Georgia does,
including Baker Mayfield. He can take off himself.
He has good wheels and is smart with the football. So, and he's been playing for a while. I mean, he's a 3-year veteran in college football, and he is lights out. So you're going to be playing against probably the best quarterback in the country. Well, not probably, but the best quarterback in the country, and he does have some mobility. But the rushing game, they've got Anderson, Trey Sermon, Abdul Adams, and their number one running back is running for almost 1,000 yards. They run for 5.5, 6 yards a carry when they carry the rock. So what happens with Oklahoma's potent offense is you get that passing going out there, and then it opens up the running game. So this will be an interesting test. Georgia's not seen another opponent like this.
No, they have not. But on the same thing, Oklahoma's never seen a defense like Georgia's defense.
And there you go. So
balance here.
It's fairly simple math that Georgia has to, I think, put some pressure on Baker Mayfield. They did that against Stidham. Stidham was a very good quarterback, and so I think one of the things that Georgia is going to have to do is their front seven is going to have to put some pressure. They may be bringing 5. Obviously, they were stunning and blitzing with Roquan Smith and Bellamy in this game against Auburn. So there's a 30-day lag time here, but there's a lot to prepare for. And you're going against most likely the Heisman candidate, and that would be a good time for to have some sacks, maybe get a pick or 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hopefully we'll have our own award winners that'll be going up against Oklahoma. Coming up this Thursday night, there are the other awards other than the Heisman that will be handed out. And maybe we'll have, Roquan Smith, an award winner that they'll have to worry about.
Is that for the Butkus?
Yeah, I'm sure he is up for there are a few different he's probably up for the Butkus Awards, probably up for the the Nagarsky Award for Best Defensive Player. You just never know. We're going to be able to see the Bulldogs showing off their awards and their hardware just as much as Baker Mayfield.
And one award would be a good semifinal trophy to bring back from Pasadena back to Atlanta. And how about that? Wouldn't that be a good way to carry on the season? Is to bring it back to Atlanta.
No doubt.
And take on either Clemson or Alabama.
Yes. So it would be. It's either way. Whoever they play, it'll be back. It'll be a Southern College, Southern University. Once the Bulldogs pull off a win out in California.
Well, I have got a prediction on Georgia versus Oklahoma.
Okay. Well, we got a few moments here. Let's. What do you think?
I think Georgia's defense can put a shutdown. I don't think that Oklahoma is going to put up 45 points on
I can't
Georgia.
See it either.
I just don't see it happening. I see too much speed closing it down. I see some more put them in third and long situations, stop some drives. You actually have about 12 to 14 possessions in a game. Right. So what Georgia needs to do is put a stop to have three-quarters of those, in some on punts, maybe a turnover here or there. I just don't see Oklahoma being able to fling the ball around or actually run the ball with Georgia's speedy defense. So I think Georgia's going to have an advantage there.
Yes.
And the ball control is going to be another issue, as I don't think that Oklahoma is going to be able to stop the Georgia run. I think Georgia will be able to maintain possession of the ball. You can almost see that plan coming together.
Sure can.
That time of possession by running the ball and keeping it on the ground and keeping it away from Baker Mayfield.
Here you go. That's going to be the key. Like you said earlier today, the best defense is just keeping their offense off the field. That would be a great thing, a great accomplishment, and I agree with you on that entirely.
Mayfield's an outstanding talent, so I'm going to go 31-24 Georgia in the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. So I've got Georgia coming back here to the Mercedes-Benz Stadium to play either Clemson or Bama.
Okay.
For the national title.
That sounds pretty good. I'll put in a quick one before we wrap up here today. I'm going to go with a 34, let's go 34-21. That's what I'm going to go with. Every time I'm going to keep my string going. Every time I've gone with the over 30, Georgia has done well. So
there you go.
I can't complain about that. So I'll stick with that. And we can talk about that in our next DawgDial show that we have between now. We have a few more shows between now and that New Year's Day game out in Pasadena for the Rose Bowl. So, folks, please stick with us on DawgDial throughout the month of December. You can send in comments on our Facebook page at DawgDial on Facebook, as well as through our Twitter at DawgDial is our Twitter handle. You could also email us at crmsportsgeorgia@crmsports.com. Before we get going, let's make sure we point out the executive producer of DawgDial is John Rawl. Thank you, John. And thank you, Taco, for joining us here once again in Buffalo's Cafe, Woodstock, Georgia, Highway 92. I'm Josh Mendlinger. Thank you for listening. DawgDial is a production of CRM Sports. For more information, feel free to visit crmsports.com. We'll see you on the next DawgDial show, folks. Go Dogs.